A German shepherd became a hero after helping save a trapped diver from an old shipwreck. But when the town tried to honor him with a ribbon, Vesper stepped back and growled. He wasn't afraid of the sea, the crowd, or the wreck beneath the blue water. He was warning them about the very man they had just rescued. Retired Navy veteran Truett Kane had to choose between the town's applause and his dog's silent truth. What began as a miracle rescue soon uncovered a lie buried deeper than the ship itself. Watch until the end, then tell us where you're watching from. And please like and subscribe to help us create more heartfelt stories. Port Liora woke gently, as if the whole town had been taught not to disturb the sea. Morning light spilled over the Florida panhandle in long sheets of gold. Touching the white docks, the pastel fishing boats, the gulls standing like old judges on the railings. The water beyond the harbor shone turquoise and glass clear, beautiful enough to make a stranger believe nothing bad had ever happened beneath it. That was the trick of bright places. They made grief work harder to be seen. Along the waterfront, shopkeepers were already hanging paper lanterns for Baylight Week. Pale yellow, coral pink, sea glass green. The festival was still 3 days away, but Port Liora had been preparing for it like a family preparing a meal they could not quite afford. The little town needed the tourists. The bait shop needed them. The cafe with the blue awning needed them. The woman who sold hand-painted shells beside the pier needed them badly enough that she had started smiling at strangers before they had even parked their cars. The economy had not died in Port Liora. It had simply learned to breathe shallowly. At the far edge of the harbor, away from the prettiest row of shops, stood a small wooden house painted a faded blue, the color of old postcards left too long in a window. Behind it sat a narrow shed full of dive tanks, cracked fins, pressure gauges, toolboxes, and enough salt-stained rope to tie down a small kingdom. That was where Truett Kane lived. He was 46 years old, though in certain light he seemed older, not because his body had weakened, but because his eyes had carried too much weight for too long. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean and compact, built like a man made for endurance rather than display. His face was clean-shaven, the skin close to the bone showing a square jaw and sharp cheekbones that gave him a severe look until he smiled, which he rarely did and never by accident. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, short and practical, though a little longer than regulation would have allowed. His skin was fair beneath the weathering, roughened by northern cold and salt wind from years of service and years after service. His eyes were gray-blue, the kind of color the sea wore before storms, watchful even when he appeared still. He wore the same things most days: an old olive-gray tactical combat shirt softened by years of washing, frayed at the cuffs and shoulders, earth-brown combat pants with worn knees and cargo pockets that sagged from use, old military work boots, and a scratched military watch that had survived more than one life with him. On that morning, Truett was seated outside his shed, repairing a second-stage regulator for a young charter diver who had offered to pay full price. Truett had refused full price. The young man had argued. Truett had looked at him once. The young man had wisely stopped arguing. Beside Truett, sprawled half in the sun and half in the shade, lay Vesper. Vesper was a male German shepherd, somewhere between 4 and 5 years old, with a yellow-black coat, a deep chest, strong legs, and upright ears that missed very little. He wore an old brown leather collar scratched white at the edges. His amber-brown eyes had the strange intelligence of working dogs, the kind that made people feel observed, assessed, and occasionally forgiven. At the moment, however, he was not looking particularly noble. He had one tennis ball in his mouth and was trying with tragic determination to fit a second one beside it. "Vesper," Truett said without looking up. "Physics." The dog paused, tail thumping once against the boards. "Can't negotiate with it." Vesper tried again anyway. From the neighboring dock, old June Callister laughed so hard, the paper bag in her arms nearly split. She was 68, soft around the middle, silver-white hair pinned back, wearing a cream blouse under a mint-green cardigan and an apron dusted with flour. She ran the Baylight Diner, which meant she knew everyone's breakfast order, everyone's family troubles, and at least half the sins committed in town since 1979. "That dog has more ambition than most men I've dated," June called. "That's a low pier to jump," Truett replied. June pointed at him with a wrapped loaf of lemon bread. "Careful. I feed you out of pity. You feed Vesper out of pity. I'm collateral damage." At the sound of his name, Vesper finally gave up the impossible dream of double-ball glory and trotted to June with the solemn urgency of a priest approaching a relic. June bent and scratched the shepherd between the ears. "See? A gentleman. Greedy, but a gentleman." For a moment, something almost peaceful settled over the morning. Truett watched the dog lean into June's hand, eyes half closing, body loose in the sun. That small sight did something to him. It reached into a room inside him where the lights were usually off. There had been years when Truett believed he would never again trust anything warm. Not a room, not a voice, not his own breathing. Then Vesper had come into his life with sand on his paws, discipline in his bones, and a habit of resting his head against Truett's chest whenever the old nightmares clawed up from below. The dog never asked what had happened in the flooded compartment years ago. Never asked why Truett sometimes woke with his hand pressed against his throat. Never asked why deep water could look like a doorway and a grave at the same time. Vesper simply stayed. Some creatures carried love like a torch. Vesper carried it like a rope. Truett was tightening a valve when the harbor radio inside the shed crackled. At first he ignored it. The harbor radios crackled all day, docking requests, weather checks, fishermen complaining about tourists, tourists asking where the fish were as if the fish had a receptionist. Then the tone changed. Static broke. A woman's voice came through, clipped and controlled. "Port Liora Harbor to available rescue units. We have a diver in distress near the Bellwether site. Repeat, diver in distress near the Bellwether site." Truett's hand stopped moving. Vesper lifted his head. June's smile faded. "Lord," the radio continued, carrying fragments now. "Private survey team, commercial diver, possible entrapment, oxygen status uncertain." The morning around Truett did not change, and that made it worse. The lantern still moved softly in the breeze. A gull still stole something from a trash bin. The water still shone blue and generous under the sun. The Bellwether lay less than 2 miles offshore near the reef line. To tourists, it was a beautiful wreck, a place where sunlight broke through clear water and painted the ribs of an old ship in trembling silver. Dive brochures called it historic. Photographers loved it. Couples on vacation pointed to it from glass-bottom boats and imagined romance in its decay. But old things underwater did not belong to romance. They belonged to pressure, corrosion, currents, and silence. For the older people of Port Liora, the Bellwether was memory. It had gone down decades ago, before Truett was born, and over time the sea had turned its ruin into shelter. Fish moved through its broken holds. Coral clung to its frame. The wreck had become less a dead ship than a strange metal reef, a cathedral for small living things. Mara Ellery had once said that to him. She had stood at the end of his dock with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm, her chestnut brown hair tied low and already coming loose in the wind, her sun-browned face serious as scripture. And at 39, Mara carried the restless energy of someone who slept badly because the world kept damaging what she loved. She was the marine biologist responsible for monitoring the reef around the Bellwether, and she spoke of coral the way some people spoke of children or saints. "The wreck slows the current," she had told him. People see rust, I see a wall holding back a hand. Truett had not asked whose hand. He had understood enough. Now the radio spat another line of static. Diver identified as Dorian Vale, commercial risk assessor attached to the private survey crew. June looked at Truett. You know him? No. You know that wreck. Truett set the regulator down. He did know it, better than he wanted to. He knew the angle of its collapsed forward hatch, knew the narrow places where a tank could catch if a diver turned too fast, knew the lower service compartment where silt bloomed thick as smoke, knew how a man could be alive and unreachable only 30 feet from sunlight. His left hand curled once, slowly. Vesper moved closer, not touching him, but near enough that Truett could feel the dog's presence like heat. The radio went quiet, then crackled again. Captain Ransom en route to Kane's repair shed. Truett closed his eyes. Of course she was. Captain Blythe Ransom arrived less than 5 minutes later in a harbor utility truck that still had dried soot on the tires. She stepped out before the engine fully settled, a tall, sturdy woman of 52 in a Navy Harbor master jacket, gray blonde hair tucked back, eyes the color of steel left in rain. Blythe did not waste words. She had the old rescue worker habit of spending emotion only after the work was done. Kane, she said. No. You haven't heard the ask. I heard enough. Blythe stopped at the edge of the shed. The survey team's lead diver is trapped in the Bellwether's starboard service passage. Their backup diver panicked and surfaced too fast. Coast Guard response is moving, but not fast enough. You mapped that passage for the reef safety review. 3 years ago. You still know it. Truett stood. His face had gone still in the way men go still when a door opens inside them, and something old steps through. Send Mara's reef crew, he said. Mara's on the water monitoring from the science skiff. She can guide topside, not enter that compartment. You know why. Because the passage narrowed. Because the wreck had shifted. Because a man with the wrong fear in his chest could turn a rescue into 2 recoveries. Blythe's voice softened by half an inch. I wouldn't ask if there was another clean option. Truett looked past her to the harbor. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath without knowing it. A boyish deckhand on a charter boat had stopped coiling rope. A woman with festival flowers in her arms stood frozen outside the cafe. Even the gulls seemed cruelly loud. Truett hated them for looking. Then he hated himself for hating them. I'm not on a rescue roster, he said. No, but you're qualified, experienced, and familiar with the site. I'm also not the man you remember from the service files. Blythe held his gaze. None of us are. That landed harder than he wanted it to. Truett turned away and walked into the shed. For one trembling second, he did not see tanks and fins and hanging wetsuits. He saw another compartment, another ocean, another man's gloves slipping from his grip in water turned black by silt and panic. He heard the impossible calm of his own voice saying, Hold position. I'm coming back. Though he had not come back fast enough. His throat tightened. Behind him, Vesper gave one low whine. Not fear, recognition. Truett braced one hand against the workbench. His military watch ticked softly on his wrist. The old sound, stubborn and ordinary, pulled him halfway back. I can't freeze down there, he said. Blythe did not answer too quickly. Then don't go for pride. Don't go for the town. Don't go for me. Truett looked at her. Go for the diver, she said, one breath at a time. Silence opened. Then Vesper did something none of them expected. He walked to the shed doorway and stood across it, blocking the exit. Not to keep Truett in, but to keep the world out. His body was calm, ears forward, eyes fixed on Truett with a steadiness that held neither demand nor pity. Truett stared at him. There were commands a dog could learn. Sit, stay, search, hold. And there were commands a dog gave without language. Live with yourself. That was what Vesper's eyes seemed to say. Not bravely, not cleanly, not without shaking. Just live with yourself after this choice. Truett exhaled. It hurt. Fine, he said. June made a sound behind him, something between a prayer and a curse. Blythe nodded once, already moving. I'll get you a boat window and a dive partner topside. Mara's sending current data. No partner in the passage, Truett said. Too tight. I know. He pulled down his old dive bag from the shelf. The canvas was faded, the zipper stiff with salt. Vesper came beside him and pressed his shoulder against Truett's leg. You're not coming under, Truett murmured. Vesper sneezed, which June later claimed was his way of saying Truett had stated the obvious like an amateur. Despite himself, Truett almost smiled. Almost. By the time they reached the rescue boat, news had already spread along the waterfront. People stood in small clusters near the pier, whispering. A private survey vessel rocked offshore near the reef line, tiny from the harbor but visible against the glittering water. Beyond it, the sea looked bright and harmless. Mara's voice came through Blythe's handheld radio, tight but clear. Current is shifting east by half a knot. Visibility around the wreck is good at surface, likely reduced inside compartments. Tell Truett the starboard service passage may have more silt than last season. Blythe glanced at him. I heard, Truett said. He stepped onto the rescue boat. Vesper jumped after him before anyone could stop him. Vesper, Truett said. The dog planted his paws on the deck. June, standing at the dock with one hand pressed to her chest, called, Good luck winning that argument? Blythe looked at the dog, then at Truett. He stays topside. He knows. Vesper moved to the bow as the engine started facing the open water. The wind lifted the fur along his neck. His old brown collar caught a flash of sunlight. Truett sat near the gear rack and began checking his equipment with hands that remembered even when the rest of him wanted to forget. Mask, regulator, backup, knife, line, gauge. Each object had a place. Each motion belonged to training older than fear, but fear was there. It sat behind his ribs like a closed fist. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Port Liora slipped behind them in color and noise, lanterns, white railings, June's mint cardigan, the distant clap of a loose halyard against a mast. Ahead, the water opened wide, the bellwether waited beneath it. No smoke, no thunder, no darkness, just blue sun, clear water, and an old wreck lying under the surface like a promise made by someone who had not yet decided whether to keep it. Vesper stood at the bow, nose lifted into the wind. Truett watched him for a long moment. Then he looked down at the sea, and somewhere below that shining skin of water, a trapped man was running out of time. The rescue boat cut across the bay as if it were slicing through blue glass. Behind it, Port Liora shrank into color and noise, white railings, paper lanterns, the faint line of people gathering along the dock. Ahead, the sea opened wide, bright and merciless. Sunlight flashed off the waves so sharply that Truett had to narrow his eyes. The day was too beautiful for the kind of work waiting beneath it. That was the thing about the ocean. It did not dress for the occasion. Vesper stood at the bow, paws braced against the moving deck, ears forward, nose lifted. The wind pushed through his yellow-black coat and flattened the fur along his neck. He did not bark. He simply watched the water, and that silence made Truett more uneasy than any noise could have. Captain Blythe Ransom stood near the radio console, one hand gripping the frame above her head. Her Navy harbor master jacket snapped in the wind. She had already stopped being a woman and become procedure. Voice clipped, face still. Every word measured for use. Mara, give me current and entry conditions, Blythe said into the radio. A crackle answered first, then Mara Ellery's voice, tight with controlled urgency. Surface visibility is strong. Current shifting east, half knot and rising, silt risk inside the starboard service passage. Survey team says Dorian's last location is near the lower auxiliary compartment. Truett sat on the bench near the gear rack, pulling on his gloves. His hands moved with an old precision he did not quite feel. Mask, line, backup regulator, cutting tool, pressure check. Each object clicked into place like a bead on a rosary. He did not pray much anymore. He had seen too many men pray and drown anyway, but he respected ritual. Ritual gave panic something to stand behind. The private survey vessel rocked beyond the reef line, larger than Truett expected, white-sided and too polished for work that claimed to be simple documentation. 2 crew members stood near the stern in matching sunshirts, looking frightened in the way people did when they had not yet decided whether to be guilty or useless. A 3rd man shouted as Blythe's boat came alongside. "He's still responding," the man called. "Weak, but responding." "Name," Blythe snapped. "Dorian Vale." "I know his name. Yours." The man swallowed. "Evan Mott. Camera tech." He was 30-ish, thin, pale beneath his tan, with a trimmed beard and sunglasses pushed up into sandy hair. His hands kept opening and closing at his sides. Not a diver's calm, not a criminal's calm either. Just fear looking for somewhere to go. Truett stepped onto the survey vessel long enough to study the gear spread near the stern. 2 dive rigs, a coil of guideline, a sealed orange equipment case marked with black tape and no company logo, too clean, too carefully placed. Vesper, still on Blythe's boat, gave one low sound in his throat. Truett looked back. The dog's eyes were fixed on the orange case. "Vesper," Truett said quietly. The shepherd did not move, but his body tightened. Blythe noticed. So did Evan Mott. "It's just camera gear," Evan said too quickly. Truett did not answer. From the radio clip to Blythe's shoulder came Dorian's voice, distorted by distance, pressure, and fear. "Air's getting thin. I can hear metal shifting. Somebody tell me you're coming." The voice was good. That was Truett's first thought, and he disliked himself for having it. Good fear, controlled panic. Enough break in the breath to sound desperate. Not enough to lose clarity. Then the sea slapped the hull, and Truett hated himself again. A man was trapped below. Whatever else waited in the wreck, rescue came first. Always. He entered the water backward, and the bright world vanished. The sea closed over him with a cold, blue hush. Sound changed immediately. The engine became a dull vibration overhead. His own breath filled the mask, steady and mechanical. Bubbles rose past his cheek like small silver prayers that wanted no part of him. For the first 20 feet, everything was beautiful. Sunlight moved in pale ladders through the water. Small fish turned as one body above the reef. The sand glowed white beneath him. Farther ahead, the bellwether emerged from blue distance, ribs of rust and coral. Broken bow angled toward the deeper channel like a beast that had died trying to crawl home. Truett slowed. His chest tightened once. Not now. He adjusted his grip on the guideline and forced his attention onto shapes, not memories. Mara's voice came through the comm, faint but clear. "Truett, you're approaching the starboard break. Stay above the outer rail, then drop along the collapsed davit. Silt pocket below." "Copy," he said. The wreck grew larger. The bellwether had been a cargo vessel once, though the sea had long ago taken away its human purpose. Coral crusted its edges, sponges bloomed along torn seams, fish passed through window openings where men had once looked out at weather. Now a man was inside. Truett reached the starboard opening and clipped the guideline to the outer rail. His light cut into the passage. The beam caught suspended particles, turning the water ahead into a corridor of drifting dust. His breathing remained steady. Then something tapped softly against metal inside. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Dorian. Truett entered. The passage narrowed around him. The wreck seemed to lean in. His tank brushed once against an overhead pipe, and the sound carried through the water like a bell struck underground. His pulse jumped. He stopped. Not because he wanted to, because if he moved wrong now, fear would move for him. He pressed 2 fingers against the old watch under his glove. He could not feel the tick through neoprene, but he knew it was there. Seconds still existed. The world had not yet become that other compartment, that other dark, that other glove slipping from his reach. "Talk to me, Kane," Blythe said through comms. "Still moving?" "Your breathing changed. Passage is tight." "Understood. No comfort, no useless courage, just acknowledgement." It helped. He pushed deeper. A faint glow appeared ahead. Dorian's light angled wildly against a torn bulkhead. Truett rounded the bend and saw him. Dorian Vale was pinned near the lower auxiliary compartment, one leg trapped beneath a curved sheet of fallen metal. He wore a dark navy-black commercial dive suit with reinforced gray panels. His mask was clear, his eyes wide, his body angled awkwardly in a way that looked painful but not yet catastrophic. Truett's light swept over him once, then twice. The first sweep looked for injury. The second looked for lies. Dorian grabbed at the water when he saw him. "Thank God." "Stop moving," Truett said. "I can't get free. The whole section shifted." "I said stop moving." Dorian froze. Truett examined the metal pinning him. It had not fallen from directly overhead. It had slid sideways from a broken interior brace, likely shaken loose by current pressure. Bad luck, perhaps, or bad planning. He checked Dorian's pressure gauge. The number was wrong, not low enough. Dorian had reported less air than this. Even accounting for panic breathing, even accounting for a faulty estimate, the difference was large. Truett said nothing. Instead, he shifted his light to the trapped leg, then to the surrounding frame. There, on the inner edge of a steel rib, he saw clean scoring, fresh cut marks, not old corrosion, not reef scrape. Something sharp had bitten into the metal recently, leaving pale wounds under the rust. His light moved again. Behind Dorian's shoulder, half buried in silt and caught beneath the fallen sheet, was a narrow line, too straight, too new. A secondary escape tether, dark and thin, threaded through a service gap that led toward the outer hull. A prepared exit. Truett's jaw tightened inside the mask. Dorian followed the beam and spoke quickly. "That was there when I came in." Truett looked at him. Even through the distortion of water and glass, Dorian seemed to understand that he had answered too soon. A small moment passed between them. Not accusation, not confession. Something uglier, recognition of a door neither man wanted to open yet. Then the wreck groaned. The sound traveled through metal and water deep enough to be felt in the bones. Dorian's eyes went animal-wide. Truett made his decision. The questions could drown. The man could not. "Blythe," he said. "I have visual. Diver pinned by shifted sheet metal. Conscious. I'm freeing him." "Copy." Mara's voice cut in. "Truett, current is picking up outside. You may get silt surge if that panel moves." "Understood." He anchored himself, pulled the compact lift wedge from his belt and worked it under the bent sheet. Dorian began breathing faster. "Look at me," Truett ordered. Dorian did. Slow inhale, long exhale. You panic, you burn air, and kick silt. You kick silt, we both become memories. Dorian nodded too fast. Truett set the wedge. The metal resisted. He adjusted angle, hand steady, shoulder burning. His old injury sent a line of heat up his neck. The panel shifted an inch, then stuck. Silt bloomed from beneath it, soft and brown, reaching into the beam of his light. For one terrible second, the water became another water. Black silt, gloved hands. A voice on comms saying his name, then not saying anything. Truett felt the past open its mouth. Then faint through the comms, a sound came from topside. Vesper barking. Once. Sharp. Again. Not frantic. Not wild. A short, hard rhythm. Blythe must have keyed the deck mic by accident, or maybe the sound carried through someone's open channel. It did not matter. The bark struck through the darkening water like a hand on Truett's back. Here. Now. Not then. Truett exhaled. Again. He whispered to himself. He reset the wedge and pushed. The panel lifted enough for Dorian to yank his leg free. Too fast. His fins struck the silt, and visibility dropped by half. "Easy," Truett snapped. "I'm free. You're not out." Dorian reached for him with both hands, clumsy now. Fear no longer performed. Truett caught his harness and turned him toward the guideline. They moved slowly through the narrowing passage. Truett behind him, one hand on Dorian's tank valve, the other on the line. Dorian was shaking. Not theatrical shaking. Real tremors now, traveling through the gear every time Truett steadied him. Halfway out, Dorian's fin snagged. He twisted. Silt exploded. Truett pinned him against the passage wall with one forearm, not cruelly but firmly enough to stop the panic. "Listen to me," Truett said. "You follow the line. Nothing else exists." Dorian stared at him. In that moment, his eyes did not look like a villain's eyes. They looked like a man who had built a trap and only now understood traps did not care who designed them. They cleared the passage. The blue widened. Sunlight returned like mercy. When they broke the surface, the world erupted. Hands grabbed Dorian first. Blythe's crew hauled him over the side. Someone shouted for oxygen. Someone else shouted his name. Cameras from the survey boat turned toward them, lenses glittering like insect eyes. Truett stayed in the water a few seconds longer than necessary. He hated the first breath after a dive like that. Everyone thought surfacing meant safety. But sometimes air was where memory caught up. Then Vesper appeared at the rail. The German shepherd pushed his head over the side, ears forward, amber eyes locked on Truett. His tail did not wag. He watched until Truett grabbed the ladder and climbed aboard. Only then did the dog step back. Dorian lay on the deck with an oxygen mask near his face, wet hair plastered to his forehead. He was 41, maybe, broad-shouldered and strong beneath the exhaustion, with short brown-blonde hair and a face made handsome by symmetry but worn down by something more private than fear. His eyes found Truett. "You saved my life," Dorian said. The words were correct, his voice was correct, his hand shook as he reached out. Truett looked at the hand, then took it, because people on the edge of death deserved that much, even when they carried questions in their wake. A cheer rose from the survey vessel. On the distant harbor, people were clapping, though the sound arrived thin and late across the water. Evan Mott had a camera up now, filming Dorian's recovery with tears in his eyes or sweat on his face. Truett could not tell which. "Tell them," Dorian rasped, turning slightly toward the lens. "Tell them that wreck shifted. I didn't think I'd get out." Blythe looked at Truett. Truett said nothing. Vesper did. The dog's body went rigid, his nose lowered toward Dorian's wet dive suit. He sniffed once along the knee, then near the cuff of Dorian's glove. A low growl gathered in his chest, not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough that the deck seemed to feel it. "Easy," one crewman said nervously. Vesper did not bare his teeth. He did not lunge. He simply stood between Truett and Dorian, ears high, eyes fixed, the old brown collar darkened by spray. Dorian went still, very still, Truett noticed. Vesper turned suddenly toward the orange equipment case near the survey gear. His nostrils flared. The growl changed, becoming sharper, more certain. Evan Mott stepped in front of the case. "Dog's probably overstimulated." Blythe's eyes narrowed. "Move away from the gear." It's camera equipment. I didn't ask what it was. Evan hesitated, then moved. Vesper took one step toward the case, but Truett caught his collar. Not now, Truett murmured. The dog looked up at him, almost offended. Truett understood the look. He had seen it before when Vesper found something no one wanted found. But the deck was full of witnesses, cameras, fear, gratitude, and a half-rescued man breathing through a mask. The wrong accusation spoken too early could become its own kind of drowning. So Truett held the dog back. Dorian watched the exchange through wet lashes. For the first time since surfacing, his performance cracked, not fully. Just enough for Truett to see a flash of calculation beneath the exhaustion. Then it was gone. Dorian closed his eyes and let the oxygen mask cover his face. By the time they reached the harbor, Port Liora had already written the first version of the story. A man had gone under. A hero had brought him back. A dog had stood watch. People clapped from the dock. June Callister cried openly and pretended she had salt spray in both eyes. Mara stood near the science skiff, her face pale, her clipboard held tight against her chest. She met Truett's gaze once, and he knew from her expression that she had questions too. Paramedics guided Dorian off the boat. He lifted a weak hand toward the crowd, humble enough to be adored. Vesper lowered his head to the deck. A thin trail of water ran from Dorian's discarded glove, spreading across the painted floorboards toward the drain. The shepherd sniffed it. His ears tilted forward. Truett crouched beside him. The smell that rose from the wet deck was faint, almost swallowed by salt, diesel, neoprene, and fear. But it was there, sharp, industrial, wrong. Not the smell of an old wreck, not the smell of a trapped man, not the smell of the open sea. Vesper looked up at Truett, amber eyes steady. And Truett, still wet from the rescue, still holding the taste of silt behind his teeth, understood only one thing with certainty. The ocean had given Dorian Vale back alive, but it had not given him back clean. By the time Baylight Week opened, Port Liora had learned how to turn fear into decoration. 3 days after the rescue, the white docks were lined with paper lanterns. By the 7th day, every storefront had something blue, yellow, or coral tied to its railing. The bait shop put a hand-painted sign in the window. Welcome divers. Check your tanks, not your courage. The joke was bad enough to be local and good enough to be repeated. The town needed the laughter. It needed the tourists even more. After Dorian Vale was pulled alive from the bellwether, the story spread faster than the tide could turn. A trapped diver, a retired Navy man, a German shepherd standing watch on the rescue boat. It was the kind of story people wanted to believe because it asked so little of them. It did not ask who owned the survey vessel. It did not ask why a risk assessor had been inside a narrow service passage with a secondary line. It did not ask why Truett Kane had come back from the dive quieter than before. It only asked them to clap. So Port Liora prepared to clap. The ceremony was held under the white pavilion near the central pier, where the wind smelled of lemon sugar, fried shrimp, sunscreen, and hot rope. June Callister had set up a table beside the lemonade stand, guarding 3 trays of lemon bars as if they were national treasure. Touch the corner pieces and lose a finger, she told a group of tourists. They laughed. June did not. Truett stood at the edge of the pavilion with Vesper beside his left leg, wishing the boards would split open and drop him into a crab trap. He wore the same old olive gray tactical shirt, the same worn combat pants, the same boots. June had told him to at least comb his hair. Truett had told her the wind would undo diplomacy. She had called him a tragic fence post and handed Vesper a biscuit. Vesper, for his part, looked far more suited to public honor than Truett did. The German shepherd stood tall, yellow-black coat brushed by June without permission. Old brown collar cleaned but not replaced. His ears shifted at every sound, camera clicks, gull cries, children absent from this story, but tourists' adult laughter, the creak of boats, the soft slap of small waves under the pier. He was alert but not restless. That bothered Truett. Since the rescue, Vesper had behaved like a dog listening to a sound everyone else had mistaken for silence. Twice he had stopped near the dock where the survey vessel had tied up. Once he had refused to pass the storage shed where the orange equipment case had been carried. He had not barked. He had simply stood still, body angled, nose working slowly. Truett had told himself not to build a trial out of a dog's unease. Still, he had not slept well. Captain Blythe Ransom stood near the pavilion steps, arms folded, navy jacket buttoned despite the heat. The harbor master's face gave nothing away, but her eyes kept moving. Not nervously, never that. Blythe watched crowds the way old rescue workers watched weather. Mara Ellery arrived late, carrying a canvas field bag instead of a purse. Her cream shirt was partly hidden beneath a faded light blue sun jacket, her chestnut hair tied low but already loosened by the wind. She paused at the edge of the crowd, looked once toward the water, then toward Truett. She did not smile, neither did he. There had been no time for a proper conversation after the rescue. Dorian had been taken away for evaluation. The survey crew had been interviewed briefly, too briefly in Truett's opinion. The orange case had vanished into their locked storage before Blythe could request a closer look. Everyone had been wrapped in the warm blanket of a successful rescue. Warm blankets could hide a lot of blood. A microphone squealed. The mayor said something cheerful about courage. Truett heard only pieces. Community, gratitude, Baylight spirit. The crowd applauded at the right places. Then Hollis Brant stepped onto the pavilion. Truett had never met him before, but he knew the type. Some men entered a room like they owned it. Hollis entered as if ownership would be vulgar to mention. He was in his mid-50s, tall, straight-backed, elegant in a navy linen blazer over a white shirt, cream trousers sharp enough to cut paper, brown loafers that had never known fish guts. His black hair was silvered at the temples and combed back with expensive restraint. A thin smile rested on his face, polished and patient. He looked like a man who could sell a storm back to the sky. "Friends of Port Liora," Hollis began, his voice warm enough to make strangers feel included. This town reminded the whole coast what courage looks like. More applause. Vesper's ears tilted forward. Hollis spoke of partnership, of safety, of responsible tourism, of honoring the past while protecting the future. His words were soft lanterns strung across a dark alley. He did not say the bellwether should be removed, not directly. He did not say the old wreck stood in the way of Baylight Harbor, his proposed floating marina and eco-resort complex, not yet. Instead, he said, no dream of preservation should ever come at the cost of a human life. A murmur moved through the crowd, gentle and obedient. Truett looked toward Mara. Her jaw had tightened. Hollis turned slightly. And no one understands that better than the man who survived what could have been a tragedy beneath our waters. Mr. Dorian Vale. Dorian stepped up from the side of the pavilion. He looked better than a man had any right to look 1 week after nearly drowning inside an old ship. There was still a bruise near his left cheekbone and a careful stiffness in his walk, but the effect made him more convincing, not less. His short brown blonde hair had been combed neatly. He wore a clean navy shirt rolled at the sleeves, and his broad shoulders carried the crowd's sympathy like a jacket tailored for him. He did not stand close to Hollis. That was clever. He stood just far enough away to look independent. Just close enough for Hollis to rest a brief hand on his shoulder when the applause rose. Truett noticed the hand. He noticed Dorian notice it too. Dorian approached the microphone. For a moment he seemed overcome. He looked at the dock, at the sea, at the people. Then he found the camera from the local news station. "I don't remember everything clearly," he said. Truett's eyes narrowed. That was a useful beginning. Fog excused gaps, gratitude excused performance. "But I remember the sound," Dorian continued. "Metal shifting around me. My own breathing getting louder. And I remember thinking that if no one came, I'd become part of that wreck." The crowd was silent now. June had stopped pretending to arrange lemon bars. Dorian swallowed, timed perfectly or sincerely enough that it no longer mattered. "The bellwether is beautiful. I understand why people love it. But down there, beauty can become a trap. I owe my life to Truett Kane, to Captain Ransom's team, and—" He looked down toward Vesper. "To that dog." Vesper did not wag. Dorian's smile faltered by one tooth. The mayor hurried forward with the Baylight Hero ribbon. It was not a medal, not officially, just a blue and gold ribbon fixed to a small brass token shaped like a lighthouse. Something made for photographs, not history. First they handed one to Blythe. She accepted with stiff politeness as if someone had given her a decorative anchor and asked her to wear it. Then they called Truett. He walked up because refusing would make more noise than accepting. The applause felt like rain on a closed coffin. He took the ribbon, nodded once, and stepped back. Then came Vesper. The mayor smiled too brightly. "And now for our four-legged hero." People laughed warmly. A photographer crouched. June whispered, "Be dignified," though whether she meant Truett or Vesper was unclear. Truett gave Vesper the hand signal to sit. The dog sat. The crowd sighed. For half a second, the moment almost became harmless. Then the mayor leaned down with the ribbon. Vesper's head turned, not toward the mayor, toward Dorian. His body changed so completely that Truett felt the air shift through the leash. The softness left him. His spine rose. Ears sharp, tail still. His gaze fixed past the ribbon, past the applause, past every human explanation offered by the day. A low growl gathered in his chest. The crowd quieted in pieces. "Vesper," Truett said softly. The dog did not look at him. Dorian stood near the side of the pavilion beside a small black duffel and a waterproof equipment pouch. His smile remained, but his hand moved down almost casually toward the pouch strap. Vesper saw the hand. So did Truett. The dog moved before anyone else understood movement had begun. He did not leap at Dorian's throat. He did not snarl like some beast in a cheap story. He pulled hard, one clean surge of working dog certainty, dragging the leash through Truett's palm before Truett could tighten his grip. A woman gasped. The mayor stumbled back. Vesper crossed the open boards and seized the edge of Dorian's waterproof pouch in his teeth. "Hey!" Dorian snapped, too sharply for a grateful survivor. The pouch fell. Its zipper split halfway. A small piece of dark rubber slid out onto the pavilion floor and stuck against a wet footprint. Vesper released the pouch and stood over the object, growling now at the thing, not the man. Truett reached him and caught his collar. "Easy." The dog's muscles trembled under his hand. The crowd leaned in, drawn by the ancient human hunger for trouble. Dorian bent quickly. "It's nothing, just dive material." But Mara was already closer. She did not touch the rubber. She crouched, eyes narrowing. The small piece was black beneath a smear of blue-green residue, thick and dull, almost tar-like. Not algae, not ordinary dock grime. "What is that coating?" she asked. Dorian looked at her, then away. "Anti-fouling compound. Gear picks up all sorts of things around wrecks." "Not that color," Mara said. The words were quiet, too quiet for most of the crowd, but Hollis heard. He stepped forward with a soft laugh, palms open. "Everyone, please. Our hero dog has had a long week. Animals carry stress differently than we do." There it was, a silk cloth thrown over a blade. Several people nodded at once. relieved to be given permission not to worry. "He was underwater?" an older man muttered. "No, but he was on the rescue boat," someone answered. "Poor thing probably still smells the panic." Vesper growled again, lower. Truett felt anger rise in him, not hot, not explosive, but clean. He had seen men dismiss instinct before. He had seen officers ignore a warning because it came from someone too tired, too young, too damaged, too inconvenient. He had watched consequences bloom from politeness. Dorian reached for the rubber. Blythe's voice cut across the boards. "Leave it." Everyone looked at her. The harbor master came down from the steps slowly. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "No one touches anything until I decide whether it belongs in a report." Hollis smiled at her. "Captain Ransom, surely this isn't necessary in the middle of a community ceremony." "Then it'll be quick." His smile remained. His eyes cooled. Dorian looked at Hollis. It lasted less than a second. A glance. A reflex. A man checking the weather before choosing his next lie. Truett saw it. So did Blythe. Maybe Mara did too, because her face changed, not into triumph, but into something more troubled. As if she had been hoping foolishly that the world would not be this ugly on such a bright day. The mayor cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a short pause." "No," Hollis said pleasantly. "Let's not let a misunderstanding steal the joy from Port Liora." He turned to the crowd with the ease of a practiced man. "A week ago, this town nearly lost a visitor beneath a deteriorating wreck. Today we are reminded that trauma lingers. In men, in animals, in communities. That is precisely why safety must be our first act of love." It was beautifully said. That made Truett hate it more. The crowd softened again. The word love did what Hollis intended it to do. It turned suspicion into embarrassment. People looked at Vesper now with pity rather than trust. Truett knelt beside the dog. Vesper was still locked on the rubber piece, breathing through his nose in short bursts. Truett placed one hand against the shepherd's chest. The heartbeat there was fast but steady. Not frenzy, not confusion. Certainty. The mayor appeared beside them, awkward and sweating. "Maybe we can still put the ribbon on him after he settles." Truett looked up. For one moment, every camera seemed to wait for him to be graceful. He could have smiled. He could have made a joke. He could have protected the town's little festival story by allowing them to pin honor onto a dog whose warning they were already trying to explain away. Instead, Truett reached for the blue and gold ribbon. He took it gently from the mayor's hand. Then he folded it once and held it in his palm. "He doesn't need to wear anything to prove he's good," Truett said. The words were not loud, but they moved. June heard them. Her eyes filled again, though this time she did not blame salt spray. Mara heard them and lowered her gaze toward Vesper with something like respect. Blythe heard them and looked out toward the water, jaw set. Vesper finally turned his head toward Truett. The growl faded. Not because he was reassured, because he had been believed. That was all any loyal creature wanted, maybe. Not praise, not ribbons, not brass shaped like a lighthouse. Only to be believed before the storm arrived, wearing a human smile. Blythe used a folded napkin from June's table to pick up the rubber piece. She placed it into a clean plastic evidence sleeve from her truck kit, ignoring the mayor's visible distress. Hollis watched her do it. Dorian watched Hollis watching. The ceremony resumed, but it had lost its skin. People clapped too late. The band started a cheerful tune that sounded suddenly inappropriate. Tourists drifted toward lemonade because sugar was easier than uncertainty. Dorian was guided toward a cluster of reporters where he recovered his humble smile and repeated that he owed Truett his life. Truett stood at the edge of the pavilion with Vesper pressed against his leg. A woman passed by and whispered, "Poor dog." Another whispered, Smart dog. That was how the town split, not with shouting, not with accusations, but with murmurs carried on warm air. Mara came up beside Truett without looking directly at him. "I want to test that residue," she said. "Can you? If Blythe releases a sample properly." She paused. "It didn't look like normal gear contamination." "No. You saw something down there." Truett watched Dorian answer questions beside the fluttering festival flags. "I saw enough to know I didn't see enough." Mara accepted that. Scientists respected incomplete answers more than most people did. Across the pavilion, Hollis placed a hand briefly on Dorian's back. Not affectionate, not congratulatory, guiding, correcting, claiming. Dorian did not turn toward him, but his shoulders tightened. Vesper gave one soft huff. Truett looked down. "Yeah," he murmured. "I saw that too." By sunset, Baylight Week continued as if nothing had cracked. Lanterns glowed above the pier, music drifted from the pavilion. June sold every lemon bar and threatened 3 more tourists with bodily harm over corner pieces. The town smiled because it needed to. But the story had changed. A week earlier, Port Liora had been given a miracle simple enough to print on a flyer. Now it had been given a question. If Vesper had not feared the sea, had not feared the wreck, had not feared the dark passage where Dorian Vale had nearly died, then what exactly had the dog recognized in the man who came back alive? By morning, Port Liora had done what small towns did best after something uncomfortable. It had divided the truth into versions. At the bait shop, Vesper was a nervous rescue dog who had embarrassed everyone during a nice ceremony. At June Callister's diner, Vesper was a 4-legged prophet with better manners than half the county commission. At the docks, among men who knew water could hide anything from a dropped wedding ring to a body, the opinion was quieter. They did not call the dog right. They did not call him wrong. They simply watched Dorian Vale's survey vessel with less trust than they had before. Truett Kane wanted none of their versions. He wanted evidence. The morning after the ceremony, he stood in the back room of the harbor office while Captain Blythe Ransom laid the evidence sleeve on a stainless steel table, and the small piece of dark rubber sat inside the clear plastic like some ugly little tooth the sea had coughed up. Vesper stood beside Truett's leg, calm now, as if the hard part had never been the growling. The hard part had been getting the humans to look. Mara Ellery entered with her canvas field bag against one hip, hair tied low, face sharpened by lack of sleep. She had the careful hands of a scientist and the eyes of someone who had already begun grieving a thing no one else believed was dying. "I can't do full lab certification here," she said, "but I can tell you what it isn't." Blythe folded her arms. "Start there." Mara opened a small portable kit and worked without drama. No grand speeches, no sudden revelation, just tweezers, swabs, test strips, notes written in a compact script. Truett found that comforting. The world had enough people who made truth sound like theater. After several minutes, Mara looked up. "It's not ordinary dive rubber contamination. The blue-black residue is consistent with industrial anti-fouling compounds. Heavy-duty grade, the kind used on submerged structures, anchoring components, sometimes drilling assemblies." Blythe's expression did not change, but her jaw tightened. "Would it belong on a recreational survey shoot?" Truett asked. "Not unless their documentary involved installing a marina under the table." Vesper gave a soft huff. Mara glanced at him. "I'm not taking questions from the dog. He says your joke needs work," Truett said. For the first time since the ceremony, Mara almost smiled. Then it faded. "Truett," she said, quieter now, "this isn't just about whether Dorian lied." The harbor office seemed to grow smaller. Mara spread a laminated map over the table. It showed the bellwether site, the reef line, the protected swim buoys, and a shaded crescent of seabed west of the wreck. Most people saw maps as proof that the world could be understood. Truett had learned that maps often showed only what men were willing to admit. Mara tapped the shaded crescent. The bellwether sits on the edge of an old sediment shelf. Not natural, not entirely. Port Liora had a military repair yard from the late 60s into the 70s. Small, mostly contract work, hull cleaning, anti-corrosion treatments, solvent baths, metal stripping. Blythe looked at the map. I knew about the yard. I didn't know about a sediment shelf. Most people don't, because the town spent decades not wanting to know. Mara's voice did not accuse. That made it worse. When the yard shut down, cleanup standards were not what they are now. Some of the contaminants settled into the bay mud. The wreck changed the flow after it sank. It became a barrier. Truett studied the line of the wreck on the map, a dead ship holding back a poisoned hand. He remembered Mara saying almost exactly that years ago, only softer. At the time, he had thought she was speaking poetically because scientists like Sudgers sometimes needed beauty to keep working near ruin. Now he understood she had been speaking literally. If the wreck is moved, Blythe asked, maybe nothing immediate, maybe only increased turbidity and reef stress. Mara paused. Or maybe enough sediment dispersal to damage the reef, the oyster beds, and the near-shore fishery for years, especially if someone starts drilling anchors into that shelf without a full environmental review. The word drilling entered the room and stayed there. Vesper's ears lifted. Truett looked down at him. The dog was staring at the rubber piece again, but not with the fierce certainty of the ceremony. This time he looked almost tired, like a messenger who had delivered the warning and now had to wait for slower creatures to build the road toward it. Blythe reached for her radio, then stopped. "We need more than residue," she said. "Hollis Brandt has lawyers. The survey team will say equipment contamination, transfer, old wreck material, anything." "Then we get more," Mara said. The office door opened before anyone could answer. June Callister entered carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups and an expression that suggested she had never once in her life knocked before entering a building she considered morally obligated to feed her. "I heard people were being serious in here," she said. "That always leads to low blood sugar." "June," Blythe said, "this is an active harbor matter. Then drink actively." June set the tray down and saw the map. Something shifted in her face. The humor did not vanish. It retreated like a curtain pulled back from an older room. "That old yard," she said. Mara looked at her. "You remember it?" "I remember men coming into my father's diner with blue stains on their sleeves and coughs they said were from cigarettes." June's voice softened into a place the town rarely asked her to visit. "I remember Mullet washing up after a rainstorm one August. I remember my mother telling me not to swim by the South Pier because the water had a shine on it." No one spoke. June looked at the shaded crescent on the map. "They promised jobs. Folks believed them because hungry people can't afford suspicion. Then the company left and the water stayed strange for years." Truett watched her hands. They were still on the coffee tray, fingers dusted faintly with flour. Hands that made lemon bars. Hands that had also held memory long enough for others to pretend it was gone. "Did anyone file reports?" Blythe asked. June gave a small laugh without amusement. "Honey, back then, reports went into drawers. Drawers went into offices. Offices got painted over by men with better shoes." For a moment, Truett thought of Hollis Brandt's polished loafers on the pavilion boards. The past had a dress code. It changed every generation, but it always knew how to look respectable. By noon, the little back room had become a war room without anyone saying so. Not a loud one. No shouting. No corkboard covered in red string. Just coffee going cold, maps weighted by tape dispensers, and people trying to build a truth sturdy enough to survive money. That was when Nell Park arrived. She came in through the side door with a waterproof data case under one arm and a tablet in her other hand. Nell was 44, small-framed Korean-American with straight black hair cut to her shoulders and clipped back behind one ear. She wore a slate blue utility jacket over a gray technical shirt, black cargo pants, and sonar headphones resting around her neck, like a permanent accusation. Her face was calm in a way that made nervous people more nervous. She did not greet anyone properly. She placed the tablet on the table and said, "The camera didn't fail." Blythe turned. "Good morning to you too." "It's afternoon." June slid a coffee toward her. "You're welcome." Nell looked at the cup as if it were an unverified device, then took it. Mara leaned over the tablet. "What did you find?" Nell tapped the screen. "The survey team's main underwater camera stream shows continuous system status during Dorian's dive, but the actual video file has a diagnostic loop inserted." Blythe frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning the system was pretending to record while replaying internal calibration frames. Anyone glancing at the monitor would see green status indicators. No active fault, no obvious shutdown." Truett looked at the timestamp lines. Numbers, waveforms, data tracks. To him it looked like a city seen from too high up. Nell zoomed in. "But the sonar ping log from the harbor buoy doesn't match the camera clock. 3 seconds of drift here, then again here. That shouldn't happen unless someone manually switched the mode or fed it a false timing reference." June squinted. "So the machine lied." Nell took a sip of coffee. "The machine did exactly what someone told it to do." That sentence landed harder than a shouted accusation. Truett looked at Vesper. The dog had not lied either. At first he had only reacted. Scent, posture, residue, fear, animal facts. Now the human facts were beginning to form around them, slower and colder, but no less real. Blythe took out her phone. "I can issue a temporary site control order if I document risk to navigation or diver safety." "That gives us a narrow window." "How narrow?" Mara asked. 72 hours if challenged." "Hollis will challenge," Truett said. "Yes," Blythe replied, "which is why we don't waste them." The decision was made without ceremony. A formal inspection of the bellwether site would be filed under Emergency Harbor Safety Review. Mara would collect environmental samples. Nell would monitor sonar and camera feeds from the harbor console. Truett would dive only within the mapped exterior and entry points he already knew. Blythe would maintain the chain of custody and keep every step boring enough to be admissible. "Boring enough to be admissible," June repeated. "That should be on a government seal." "It probably is," Nell said. Vesper wagged once, perhaps because people had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Or perhaps because June had dropped half a biscuit into his reach and was pretending it had been gravity's fault. The next dawn came pale and quick, not golden like the day of the rescue, not festive like Baylight Week. This was a working dawn, washed in pearl gray, with the water smooth and the air cool enough to make the skin wake up. Blythe's harbor boat left before the tourists were out of bed. Mara sat near the sample kit, checking bottles and labels. Nell remained back at the harbor console, voice in their ears through the radio link. June, officially uninvolved, had appeared at the dock anyway with coffee and a warning that if anyone died before breakfast, she would take it personally. Truett did not laugh, but he took the coffee. Vesper came aboard with him. No one argued this time. At the bellwether site, the water was almost too clear. Truett could see pale shapes shifting below even before he entered. Reef patches, shadowed metal, the long broken back of the wreck. He and Mara descended together. Mara was not a rescue diver, but underwater she moved with the calm familiarity of someone entering a beloved library. She did not hurry. She noted. She measured. Her gloved hands hovered over coral without touching it, careful as prayer. Truett kept to the exterior frame, line clipped, attention divided between structure, current, and the old unease that slept behind his ribs. He did not enter the service passage again. He had promised Blythe. More importantly, he had promised himself that bravery and stupidity did not need to share equipment. Nell's voice came through. "I'm seeing a small hard return on the lower starboard frame, not part of the wreck profile, 2 meters aft of your position." Truett turned his light. At first he saw only coral crust and rust bloom, then metal that was too clean. A compact device sat tucked beneath a curved support strut clamped neatly to the frame. It was dark gray, palm-sized, with a low-profile antenna folded flat against it. Not a camera, not a sensor for documentary work. Mara saw it too. She moved closer, eyes narrowing behind her mask. Truett photographed it before touching anything. Blythe's voice reminded him to record angle, position, depth, relation to frame. He did, boring enough to be admissible. Then Mara pointed to a faint scrape line along the hull near the device. Fresh, Truett felt the old soldier in him go still. The device was not watching the wreck. It was marking it. More specifically, marking where something else would come later. He followed the angle with his light, drawing an imaginary line from the device through the water toward the sediment shelf Mara had shown him on the map. Anchor placement. Foundation point. A future wound. Above them, Vesper began barking. The sound came faintly through the open deck channel, distorted by water and electronics. Not the sharp rhythm he had used during Truett's panic. This was different, urgent, directed away from the wreck. Blythe's voice cut in from topside. "Vesper's locked on the shoreline." Truett looked up through the wavering ceiling of water. For one suspended moment he saw only the underside of the boat and the pale sun trembling above it. Then Nell's voice broke through the channel from the harbor. No longer dry, no longer flat. "Blythe, I'm getting an alarm from Mara's center." Mara turned sharply underwater. Nell continued, each word clipped around rising anger. "Fire suppression system activated in archive room. No fire report, water flow heavy, remote login just hit the maintenance panel." Mara made a sound into her regulator that was not quite a word. Truett looked at the device clamped to the wreck, then up toward the boat where Vesper was still barking at a shore too far away to see clearly. The sea around the bellwether remained calm, beautiful, blue, and somewhere back on land, the truth they had just begun to uncover was being drowned on purpose. The Marine Center smelled like wet paper, salt, and defeat. Not fire. That would have been easier in some cruel way. Fire was dramatic. Fire gave people black beams, smoke stains, and a clean word to hate. This was quieter. Water had come down from the ceiling in disciplined silver lines, soaking file boxes, curling field maps, swelling notebooks until their pages opened like drowned flowers. Mara Ellery stood in the middle of the archive room with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, staring at the floor. A woman like Mara did not break loudly. She did not throw a chair or curse the ceiling or make a speech about justice. She simply stood there, chest still, jaw set, while water dripped steadily from a shelf marked Reef Health. Longitudinal surveys. Truett Kane knew that kind of stillness. It was not calm. It was the body refusing to waste motion because grief had already taken too much. He stepped over a soaked cardboard box and lifted one of the field notebooks from the floor. The paper sagged in his hands. Ink had bled through half the pages, turning years of careful observations into blue-gray ghosts. Mara looked at it once, then away. "Those were from before the last bleaching event," she said. "Hand entries. Some of the old volunteers never used the digital system." Truett set the notebook on a dry towel spread across a table. "We'll salvage what we can. I know." But her voice carried the terrible exhaustion of someone who understood the difference between salvage and restoration. A thing could be saved and still never be whole again. Vesper lay across the archive doorway like a yellow-black sentry, old brown collar dark against his neck. Every time someone approached too quickly, his eyes lifted. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just present. The dog had placed himself between Mara's ruined work and the rest of the world, as if devotion could become a sandbag against sorrow. June Callister arrived 20 minutes later with a bakery box, 2 thermoses of coffee, and the expression of a woman prepared to fight God over building maintenance. "I brought lemon bars," she announced. "Don't argue. Tragedy on an empty stomach turns people stupid." Nell Park, seated at a folding table with 2 laptops and a rescued hard drive open beside her, did not look up. "Sugar doesn't improve data recovery." June set a lemon bar beside her keyboard. "Neither does being unpleasant, but here we are." Nell looked at the lemon bar, then at June, then without changing expression took a bite. It was the first of Vesper's small victory of the day. Truett worked without speaking much. He moved boxes, separated wet folders, carried damaged sample containers into the lab where Mara could decide what still mattered. He did not offer bright comfort. Bright comfort in a room like this would have been an insult. Vesper, however, lost some of his holy dignity when June opened the bakery box too close to the floor. The shepherd's nose lifted. June squinted at him. "You are on duty." Vesper's tail thumped once. "Don't you wag legal arguments at me." Truett heard Mara breathe something that almost became a laugh. It vanished quickly, but not before he caught it. Sometimes Mercy entered a room wearing no armor at all. Sometimes it came as a dog trying very hard not to steal dessert. By late afternoon, Nell had recovered enough from one of the soaked drives to confirm the remote login that triggered the suppression system. The account belonged to a maintenance contractor who had not worked for the Marine Center in 6 years. "That doesn't mean he did it," Nell said, pushing her headphones down around her neck. "It means someone used credentials that should have been dead." Blythe Ransom, standing near the door with a paper cup of coffee gone cold in her hand, nodded. "Can you trace the source?" "Not cleanly. Whoever did it routed through a commercial VPN and a Marina guest network. Sloppy enough to look accidental. Careful enough to waste our time." "Could be someone from Hollis Brandt's team," Mara said. Nell's fingers moved over the keys. "Could be. Could be someone trying to make us say that without proof." Truett looked at her. Nell did not soften. Proof matters more when everyone wants a villain. There was no accusation in it, but Truett felt it anyway. He thought of Vesper at the ceremony. The growl, the rubber piece, the way Truett had wanted for one clean second to let certainty become a weapon. He looked down at the dog. Vesper gazed back with the calm of an animal who had never needed evidence to be right and would never understand why humans did. By evening, the recovered files began to form a darker shape. Nell found cached metadata tied to the private survey team's camera system. Mara cross-checked it with permit filings. Blythe pulled public records from the harbor office. June, who claimed she was only there because everyone looked underfed, somehow remembered which local storage yard had rented dock equipment to a handsome man with guilty eyes 2 weeks before the rescue. That phrase did not hold up in court. It did, however, point Nell toward an invoice. Dorian Vale's name appeared not as a documentary consultant. but as a marine risk assessment subcontractor attached to a shell company, with a mailing address in Tallahassee. That company had received payment from a development advisory group connected to Baylight Harbor. Connected, not owned. A thread, not a rope, but enough to pull. Mara found an old industry notice next. Dorian Vale had been suspended years earlier after a commercial dive accident off the Georgia coast. The public report was stripped of emotion, as official documents often were. Equipment sequence error, misreported stability condition, fatality, one diver, contributing factor, delayed disclosure of line snag and pressure irregularity. Delayed disclosure. Truett read those two words twice. A small lie had waited too long. A man had died inside the delay. Mara stood behind him, looking over his shoulder. He hit a problem. Looks that way. Then he knows exactly what this is. Truett closed the file. Outside the Marine Center windows, Port Liora glowed with Baylight Week lanterns. People were laughing somewhere near the pier. Music drifted in faintly, bright and almost cruel. He knows, Truett said. That doesn't always stop a man from doing it again. Mara looked at him then, not as a scientist looking at evidence, but as a person looking at the scar tissue beneath another person's words. You're not talking about Dorian only. Truett did not answer. He did not need to. That night he found Dorian at the far end of the West Pier. The festival noise was softer there. The lanterns thinned out. Beyond the dock lights, the bay lay dark blue and restless, carrying moonlight in broken strips. Dorian stood alone near a stack of crab traps, one hand in his pocket, the other holding an unlit cigarette he seemed to have forgotten. He looked less polished without cameras. Still strong, still handsome in the blunt way of working divers, but diminished somehow. His navy shirt was wrinkled. His hair had been combed back by fingers, not confidence. A bruise near his cheek had yellowed at the edges. Vesper walked at Truett's left side. When Dorian saw the dog, his face changed before he could stop it. Fear first, then resentment, then shame, quickly hidden. You bring him as backup? Dorian asked. He brought himself. Dorian gave a short laugh. Of course he did. Truett stopped several feet away. He did not crowd him. Men cornered too fast often chose their worst selves. For a moment, both of them listened to water slap the pilings. You had more air than you said, Truett said. Dorian's jaw worked once. You had a secondary line rigged through the service gap, Truett continued. Fresh cuts on the frame, and the camera system was looped. Dorian looked out at the bay. You always this polite before accusing someone? Only when I saved his life first. That landed. Dorian lowered his head. The unlit cigarette snapped between his fingers. I wasn't supposed to get stuck, he said. The words came out flat. Not a confession shouted from a rooftop, not some villain's monologue. Just a tired sentence stepping into the open because it had nowhere else to hide. Vesper's ears tilted forward. Truett said nothing. Dorian swallowed. It was supposed to be controlled. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Enough time for the cameras to catch the panic. Enough time for the story to get ugly. Then I pull the backup line, exit through the gap, blame structural shift and poor visibility. And the bellwether becomes dangerous. It is dangerous. So is a kitchen knife. That doesn't make every cook a murderer. Dorian turned sharply. You think I wanted anybody dead? I think you wanted something badly enough to stop measuring the cost. The words found Dorian's wound because his face lost color. For a second, Truett saw him not as the man on the pavilion, not as the diver in the wreck, but as someone who had been drowning long before he entered the bellwether. Hollis said no one would get hurt, Dorian said. He said the wreck was going to be removed anyway, said Port Liora needed the project, needed the jobs, said the incident would speed up what was already inevitable. Hollis said. Dorian's laugh was bitter now. Easy for you to stand there like judgment carved in stone. You have any idea what it's like to lose your name? Truett looked at him. Dorian went on, voice rising, but not with strength, with panic looking for a courtroom. One mistake, one report, one family who wouldn't stop saying my name like it was poison. I tried to come back clean. Nobody would touch me. Hollis did. He said I could consult, rebuild, get out from under it. A man died in that old report. Dorian flinched. I know. Do you? The pier seemed to hold its breath. Dorian's eyes shone in the docklight, not with tears exactly, but with the pressure of them. It started small, he said, back then. A snagged line, a gauge reading I thought was wrong. I didn't want to stop the job. I told myself I'd correct it once we stabilized. By the time I admitted it, we were already behind the truth. Behind the truth. Truett hated how much he understood that, not the lie, never that, but the terrible human instinct to believe a bad moment could be managed if one more minute passed, one more adjustment was made, one more person stayed calm. Truett looked toward the water. You were behind the truth again last week. Dorian wiped a hand over his mouth. I was scared. Yes. I almost died. Yes. Dorian looked at him then, angry again, because anger was easier than collapse. Then I'm a victim too. Truett took one step closer. Vesper stayed with him, silent. You were used, Truett said. I believe that. Hollis found the part of you that still needed saving and sold it back to you with a contract attached. Dorian's face twisted. But being used doesn't give you the right to drag a town under with you. The words struck harder than a fist would have. Dorian looked away first. For a long moment there was only the harbor, ropes creaking, music far off, the black water moving under the boards like a living thing with infinite patience. Finally, Dorian said, You don't understand what he has. Then tell me. I can't. You can. No. Dorian's voice dropped. You think this ends with a bad permit and some residue? You don't know how many people signed pieces of this thing. You don't know what disappears when Hollis decides it needs to disappear. Truett thought of Mara's flooded archive. I'm learning, he said. Dorian looked at Vesper. The dog watched him steadily, without hatred. That seemed to disturb Dorian more than a snarl would have. He knew, Dorian murmured. He smelled what didn't fit. No, Dorian shook his head, almost laughing. That's worse. Truett waited. Dorian bent and picked up the broken cigarette pieces from the dock, as if suddenly ashamed to leave a mess behind. I'm not confessing, he said. I didn't hear one. Dorian looked at him. Truett's face gave nothing away. For the first time, something like unwilling respect moved through Dorian's expression. Then it vanished. He walked past Truett toward the brighter part of the pier. At the edge of the dock lights, he stopped. Hollis is pushing an emergency safety survey, he said without turning. Tomorrow morning. He'll say the wreck shifted after my accident. He'll bring equipment to document immediate hazard. Equipment. Big enough to erase small things. Then he left. Truett stood with Vesper beside him until the night closed around the space Dorian had occupied. The dog leaned gently against Truett's leg. Not a command this time. Not a warning. Just wait. Warm, living wait. Truett reached down and rested his hand on Vesper's head. Across the bay, the bellwether lay beneath dark water, holding its secrets and the town's old poison in the same rusted ribs. By dawn, Hollis Brant would be moving. Blythe had 72 hours of temporary authority. Mara's archive was wounded. Nell's recovered data was incomplete. Dorian was not ready to stand in the light. and Truett understood with the old, cold clarity of a man who had seen rescue turn into recovery that they did not yet have enough. Not enough to stop Hollis, not enough to protect the reef, not enough to prove that the man they had saved was only one part of a much larger trap. Morning came bright enough to feel dishonest. The sky above Port Liora was a clean, impossible blue. The bay glittered as if someone had spilled crushed glass across the water. From shore, the town looked like a postcard mailed from a kinder world. White docks, pastel boats, gulls wheeling lazily over the marina, paper lanterns from Baylight Week still swaying between lampposts. Nothing about the day looked like a warning. That was what made Truett Kane distrust it. He stood on the harbor dock beside Captain Blythe Ransom's patrol boat, checking his gear in silence. His old olive-gray tactical shirt was rolled at the forearms, salt wind brushing the frayed cuffs. Vesper sat near his left boot, yellow-black coat shining in the sun, amber eyes fixed not on Truett but on the open water. Across the harbor, the sleek equipment vessel hired by Hollis Brant was already moving. It did not hurry. That made it worse. Guilty men sometimes ran. Powerful men often proceeded at scheduled speed. Blythe stood at the radio console, navy jacket zipped, steel blue eyes narrowed against the glare. Brant's vessel just crossed into the temporary control zone. Mara Ellery looked up from her sample case. Her face had the pale focus of someone running on coffee, anger, and grief. He knows that zone is restricted. He knows I can only hold it so long if he challenges. Blythe reached for the radio. Baylight Operations Vessel, this is Port Liora Harbor Authority. You are entering an active safety review zone. Reduce speed and hold position outside marker buoy 3. Static answered. Then Hollis Brant's voice came through, warm as polished wood. Captain Ransom, good morning. We're conducting a final visual safety survey under existing documentation. No excavation, no disturbance, only responsible observation. Truett stared at the distant vessel. Responsible observation. The words sounded clean enough to eat from. Blythe pressed the transmit button. You do not have clearance to approach the wreck frame. With respect, Captain, our council has reviewed the notice. Your temporary order cites diver safety and navigation risk, not a full environmental closure. We will remain within the lawful scope of our permit. There was no anger in Hollis's voice, no threat. That was his gift. He could make a knife sound like a handshake. Blythe looked at Truett, then Mara. He brought lawyers before breakfast. Nell Park's voice crackled over the boat channel from the harbor console. Not just lawyers. I'm reading active transponder pings from 2 auxiliary units on his deck. One looks like a compact submersible positioning rig. Mara's hands tightened around the straps of her sample case. That's not visual surveying. No, Nell said. It is very committed sightseeing. June Callister, standing on the dock with a thermos in one hand and fury in the other, pointed toward the bay. Somebody tell that man if he scratches my ocean, I'll feed him day-old biscuits until his ancestors apologize. No one laughed loudly, but Truett saw Mara's mouth move toward one. Tiny mercy in a morning already sharpening its teeth. Blythe started the engine. Everyone aboard! Vesper rose before Truett moved, stepping onto the patrol boat with the solemn confidence of someone who had never needed legal standing to know where he belonged. The ride out was fast and hard. Wind tore at Truett's shirt, spray struck his face, and the harbor fell away behind them, and with it the illusion of safety. Ahead, the bellwether waited beneath the bright water, invisible from the surface but present in Truett's mind as clearly as if its rusted ribs rose above the waves. Hollis's vessel held near the outer marker, white hull gleaming. Men moved on deck in gray shirts, equipment cases sat strapped near the stern. Dorian Vale stood among them. Truett saw him through binoculars first. Dorian looked smaller than he had at the ceremony, despite the same broad shoulders and strong diver's build. He wore a dark technical jacket over his dive shirt, hair flattened by wind, face turned toward the wreck site. He was not smiling. One hand rested near a waterproof camera bag at his feet. Blythe slowed the patrol boat between Hollis's vessel and the marked wreck zone. "Hollis," she said over radio, "hold your position." Hollis appeared near his vessel's rail in a crisp white shirt and navy blazer, as if he had dressed for a shareholder's breakfast rather than a disputed marine operation. His silvered hair did not move in the wind. Even nature seemed reluctant to inconvenience him. "Captain," he said, voice carrying across the short distance now, "we all want the same thing. Safety." Mara muttered. Men like him always say that right before they break something fragile. Nell's voice cut through the radio. "I have a new ping." Blythe looked down at the console. "From where?" "Lower starboard frame of the bellwether, same area as the locator Truett photographed. It just woke up." Mara's face went cold. "If that device is linked to a positioning rig, it could guide a drill point," Truett finished. Blythe keyed the radio. "Baylight vessel, power down all submerged positioning equipment immediately." Hollis spread his hands. "Captain, I'm afraid you're misreading routine telemetry." "No, Mr. Brandt," Nell said over the open channel before Blythe could stop her. "Routine telemetry does not handshake with an unpermitted locator attached to a protected wreck frame." A silence followed. Brief. Expensive. Then Hollis smiled. Truett could see it even from across the water. "I don't know who that is," Hollis said, "but she sounds very confident for someone not present at the site," Nell replied. "I prefer being accurate indoors." June's voice came faintly from another open line at the harbor office. "Tell him, sweetheart." Blythe closed her eyes for half a second. Truett almost smiled. Almost. Then a shout erupted from Hollis's deck. A stern line snapped loose from an auxiliary winch. It whipped across the deck, struck a metal cleat, and tangled around the leg of one of Hollis's mechanics. The man was not young, not old either. Maybe 50, heavy-set, gray hair under a cap. The sort of working man who looked more familiar with invoices and grease than corporate speeches. The line jerked tight. He went down hard. For one breath, everyone froze in that awful human pause where the mind refuses to accept that a normal object has become a weapon. Then the line dragged him toward the rail. Dorian moved. Not Hollis, not the two deckhands nearest the console. Dorian. He lunged low, grabbed a deck knife from the emergency station, and threw himself across the man's body. The line burned over the deck, tightening. The mechanic shouted, one hand clawing at a rail post. Dorian cut once. The blade slipped. He cut again. The line parted with a violent snap, whipping back into the water. The mechanic collapsed flat, gasping. Dorian stayed on his knees, breathing hard, the knife still in his hand. For a moment he looked across the gap of water at Truett. No performance, no polished survivor, no man rehearsing the correct expression for cameras, just fear, and behind it recognition. Truett knew that look. It was the look of a man standing at the mouth of an old mistake, realizing the echo had found him again. Dorian rose slowly. Hollis stepped toward him, face still controlled but eyes sharp. Dorian's hand drifted to the waterproof camera bag at his feet. Truett saw the choice pass through him like a storm moving under skin. Dorian lifted the bag as if to hand it to a crewman. Then he let it slip. It fell from Hollis's deck into the narrow strip of water between vessels, hit the patrol boat's side, and bounced onto Blythe's deck with a wet thud. Nobody spoke. Dorian looked away first. Hollis said very softly, "Dorian." The name did not sound like a warning. It sounded like ownership. Vesper stepped forward on the patrol boat, body low, ears high, eyes locked on Dorian. But he did not growl this time. That unsettled Truett more than a snarl would have. The dog was not warning now. He was watching a man decide whether to be saved twice. Blythe picked up the bag. "Chain of custody," she said, voice low. "Mara, witness. Truett, witness." Hollis's smile thinned. "Captain, that is private equipment. It landed on my deck during an active safety incident. I'll expect it returned." "I expect a lot of things," Blythe said. Nell's voice returned, urgent. "Oh, the locator ping is strengthening. Something is aligning below." Mara looked at the water. "If a drill head kisses that sediment shelf even lightly, then we mark it and pull it before they call it harmless," Truett said. Blythe turned to him. "You don't enter the wreck." "I won't. You stay exterior." "I know." Vesper looked up at him. Truett crouched and gripped the dog's collar, thumb brushing the worn leather. "Topside," he murmured. Vesper's amber eyes stayed on his. No command passed between them this time. No heroic promise. Just the old arrangement. One went down, one held the world above. Truett entered the water. The brightness underwater was almost cruel. Sunlight poured through the bay in silver columns. The bellwether appeared beneath him, vast and quiet, its rusted body clothed in coral and small flickering fish. It did not look like a crime scene. It looked like an old god asleep in a garden. He descended along the exterior line, careful, controlled. No service passage, no dark throat of metal, just the frame, the locator, the device Nell had heard waking. His light found it. The compact positioning module pulsed faintly beneath the strut, and below it, newly attached, was a small cylindrical unit with a guide clamp angled toward the sediment shelf. Not a full drill rig, not enough to excavate, enough to test resistance, enough to disturb what should not be touched. Truett clipped a marker buoy to the frame beside it. Then the wreck groaned, not loudly, not dangerously perhaps, but sound traveled differently underwater. It came through metal, bone, memory. His throat closed. For a second, the bright water dimmed. The ribs of the bellwether became the walls of another compartment. The coral became silt. The sunlight became a failing lamp. He heard a voice from years ago saying, "Kane." My lines caught. And then the voice became bubbles, and then nothing. His breathing broke pattern. Too fast, too shallow. He knew what was happening. Knowing did not stop it. The regulator filled his mouth like a stone. His chest fought the water as if the sea had reached inside him. His left hand missed the buoy clip. The marker line drifted. The whole world narrowed to the sound of his own panic. "Truett," Blythe said through comms. "Talk to me." He tried. No word came. Then from above, faint through the deck mic and water distortion, came Vesper's bark. Once. Short. Again. Steady. Again. Not frantic, not pleading. A rhythm. A practiced rhythm. The sound did not erase the memory. Nothing erased memory. But it gave the present a shape strong enough to hold. Truett closed his eyes. One breath. Then another. The sea remained around him, huge and indifferent. But he was not in the old compartment. He was not holding a dead man's gloves. He was under Port Liora's morning sun with Vesper above him, refusing to let him disappear into a place that no longer existed. Truett opened his eyes. "Still here," he said. Blythe exhaled audibly. "Finish and surface." He clipped the buoy, photographed the device, secured a small sample from the disturbed clamp area. Then he rose. When he broke the surface, Vesper was at the rail, barking once more, then stopping as if his job had been completed. Hands hauled Truett aboard. He sat on the deck for a moment, water running from his sleeves, breathing hard but alive. Mara knelt beside the retrieved marker line while Nell talked through the data from the harbor console. Blythe opened Dorian's camera bag under record, her movements precise enough to make panic wait its turn. Inside was a waterproof camera. The recovered video played on Blythe's tablet a minute later. Hollis Brandt's voice filled the deck, clean and unmistakable. 20 minutes is enough. You signal distress, you maintain air, you exit on the secondary line. We need fear, Dorian, not tragedy. The video shifted. Another clip, a technician's hand selecting diagnostic loop on the camera system, then Dorian's voice, lower, strained. And if someone asks why the wreck shifted? Hollis answered, almost amused. Then we tell them old things collapse. That is what old things do. No one moved. Across the water, Hollis stood very still. For the first time since Truett had seen him, the man had no graceful sentence ready. Blythe keyed the emergency federal channel. Her voice was calm, hard, official. This is Captain Blythe Ransom, Port Liora Harbor Authority, and I have evidence of unpermitted submerged equipment, possible tampering with a protected wreck site, and video documentation of a staged maritime distress event. Request immediate Coast Guard Investigative Service response. All vessels are to hold position. Hollis raised his radio. Captain, you are mischaracterizing. No, Blythe said. I am recording. That stopped him. Minutes later, another voice entered the channel. Male-controlled federal in the way some voices carried locked filing cabinets inside them. Port Liora Harbor Authority, this is Agent Calvin Rourke, Coast Guard Investigative Service. Maintain vessel positions, preserve all devices, recordings, and chain of custody. No party is to depart the area until instructed. Truett looked toward Hollis's vessel. Dorian stood near the rail, no longer hiding behind anyone. He did not look triumphant. He looked ruined, but he also looked for the first time unburied. Vesper pressed his wet nose against Truett's shoulder. Truett rested a hand on the dog's head. Below them, the bellwether remained under the blue water, ancient and silent. It had not risen. It had not spoken. It had not forgiven anyone. But the lie built around it had finally broken the surface. Port Liora did not become innocent again. That was the first mercy, though not everyone recognized it as one. In the old stories people like to tell at diners and church picnics, truth arrived like a bell. It rang once and all lies fell flat. The wicked were carried away, the wounded stood taller, the town washed its hands and went back to sunlight. Real truth came slower. It came in legal notices taped to office doors. It came in federal investigators walking the docks with sealed evidence bags. It came in divers marking damaged coral heads with small colored tags. It came in Mara Ellery sitting at a folding table with volunteers teaching men who once cared only about boat fuel how to write down water clarity, reef stress, fish counts, and current direction. 3 months after Agent Calvin Rourke ordered the vessels to hold position over the bellwether, Baylight Harbor was not dead. It was suspended. That word angered people at first. Suspended felt too soft. It did not sound like justice. It sounded like a hammock. But Blythe Ransom explained it the way she explained dangerous weather. Plainly, without decorating the truth. Suspended means stopped while the machinery keeps turning, she told the crowd at a town meeting. Stopped is not nothing. Captain Blythe had changed little on the outside. Same navy jacket, same straight posture, same eyes that could make a man regret casual nonsense. But Port Liora looked at her differently now. Before she had been the woman who enforced dock rules and yelled at tourists for tying boats badly. Now they saw the steel behind the rules. They saw what boring, careful authority could do when louder people were trying to sell disaster with a smile. Hollis Brandt's name still appeared in papers. His lawyers called the incident a misunderstanding of scope, a regrettable operational error, a premature subcontractor action, words bred in clean rooms, fed on money, and released into public air. But the video from Dorian's waterproof camera did not speak in adjectives. Neither did the locator device recovered from the bellwether frame. Neither did Nell Park's timestamp analysis, which had become famous in town despite her repeated attempts to prevent anyone from calling it famous. "I found a 3-second drift," she told June Callister one afternoon while sitting at the diner counter over black coffee. "I did not wrestle Poseidon." June slid a lemon bar onto her plate. "Honey, in this town, 3 seconds and a laptop is basically a trident." Nell stared at the lemon bar, then ate it. Fame had not improved her tolerance for being touched. When an elderly fisherman clapped her on the shoulder and called her, "Our little computer wizard," she looked at him for so long he apologized to the napkin dispenser. Still, she kept showing up. So did others. Men who had dismissed Mara's reef lectures as college words now sat on the pier with borrowed clipboards, squinting through polarized sunglasses at sample grids. Retired boat captains logged tide changes. Charter guides carried laminated cards showing how to identify stressed coral. 2 former supporters of Baylight Harbor volunteered to help rebuild Mara's lost archive, not because they knew how to apologize elegantly, but because they knew how to count, label, and come back the next morning. Mara accepted the help without pretending the damage had vanished. Some records were gone. Years of hand entries had blurred into unreadable stains. Several preserved samples had been compromised when the archive flooded. A portion of the reef near the unauthorized locator site showed stress from earlier disturbance. Minor, according to the first federal assessment, but minor was not the same as harmless. Mara stood over that patch one morning, wetsuit peeled to her waist, hair wet and dark against her neck, looking at the water as if it had spoken a difficult truth. Truett stood beside her on the dock. "She'll recover?" he asked. Mara did not answer quickly. He had learned that was one of the reasons he trusted her. "I think parts of it will," she said. "Some won't. Some things only become part of the record." "That enough?" "No." She looked at him then. "But it's honest." Honest, the word had become heavier in Port Liora. Dorian Vale learned that more slowly than anyone. He cooperated with Agent Rourke. That was what the paper said. It did not say he woke each morning with the face of the mechanic he had nearly failed to save burned behind his eyes. It did not say he asked twice whether the man's leg had healed right. It did not say he sat for hours in a federal office, broad shoulders hunched, answering questions that stripped his excuses down to bone. He was not forgiven by the town, not fully. Some people wanted him gone. Some wanted him punished loudly. June, when asked, said, "A man can be both sorry and guilty. The Lord gave us 2 hands for holding complicated things." Dorian did not come to the diner. He did not come to the docks during busy hours. But once, at dusk, Truett saw him standing near the far end of the West Pier, looking out toward the bellwether. No camera, no speech, no borrowed nobility. Just a man with his hands in his pockets, watching the place where his lie had almost become someone else's gray. Vesper saw him too. The German shepherd did not growl. That startled Truett more than anger would have. The dog simply stood still, ears forward, amber eyes calm, not friendly, not welcoming, but no longer warning. Dorian noticed. His face folded inward for a second, then he nodded once, not to Truett but to Vesper. It was not redemption, it was not absolution, it was one small stone placed at the beginning of a very long road. Truett let it be enough for that evening. The town held the smaller ceremony in late September after the worst heat softened and the tourists thinned into couples, divers, and old friends of the sea. There was no stage this time, no television camera, no mayor smiling too brightly. The gathering took place inside the Marine Conservation Center, in the room they had repaired after the flood. The walls smelled faintly of new paint and salt. On one side, Mara had mounted a growing archive of reef maps, photographs, hand-copied records, and volunteer logs. On the other, a glass case stood near the entrance. Inside it lay the Baylight Hero ribbon. Not around Vesper's neck, not pinned to a vest. Just folded neatly beside a weathered fragment of wood recovered years earlier from the bellwether's outer rail. A small card beneath it read, "For the rescue that saved a life, for the warning that saved a town, for the loyalty that asked for nothing." June cried when she read it and blamed paint fumes. Nell corrected a typo on the first version of the plaque before anyone else saw it, then pretended she had not saved the town from public embarrassment. Blythe stood at the back with her arms folded, satisfied in the grim way of a woman watching a dock hold through rough tide. Mara spoke briefly. She did not turn Vesper into a myth. She did not say animals knew good from evil. She said Vesper had noticed what humans were too distracted, ashamed, hopeful, or tired to see. "That is not magic," Mara said, looking toward the dog. "It is attention, and attention may be one of the last forms of love we have left." Truett looked down. Vesper sat beside him, yellow-black coat clean, old brown collar still worn and scratched. June had tried to tie a blue ribbon loosely to it that morning. Vesper had removed it in 11 seconds and dropped it in a laundry basket with the cold precision of a judge. June called him ungrateful. Vesper sneezed. Now, in the conservation center, he leaned lightly against Truett's leg. The room waited for Truett to say something. He had not planned to. That had been foolish of him. People always wanted words from the man least equipped to offer them. He stepped forward anyway. The faces looking back were not the same faces from Baylight Week. Or perhaps they were, but the town had learned how a face changed after it realized it had almost clapped for its own undoing. Truett rested one hand on the glass case. "I used to think honor was something people gave you after the hard part was over," he said. His voice sounded rough to his own ears. Vesper looked up. Truett continued. "But sometimes the hard part starts when the clapping does. Sometimes honor is not letting a crowd talk you out of what you know is true. Sometimes it is admitting you don't know enough yet and doing the work anyway." He looked at Vesper then. The dog's ears lifted. "He didn't want a ribbon," Truett said. "He wanted us to pay attention." No one applauded right away. That was good. The silence did more than applause could have. That night, long after the ceremony, Truett woke with water in his lungs. Not real water. The old kind. He came up from sleep with his hand at his throat, heart hammering, the dark room collapsing into steel walls and silt. For a moment he was back in the compartment he had never truly left. Back where a man's gloved hand had slipped away, back where his own voice had promised he was coming. Then weight pressed against his chest, warm, steady. Vesper had climbed halfway onto the bed, front paws planted beside him, head lowered against Truett's sternum. Not graceful, not dignified, too heavy, honestly. A ridiculous creature with the solemnity of an ancient guardian and the boundaries of a damp blanket. Truett breathed once. Vesper stayed. He breathed again. The room returned by inches, window, chair, old boots by the door, the faint sound of the bay outside. "You're heavy," Truett whispered. Vesper did not move. Truett let out something that might have been a laugh if it had not been so close to pain. He placed a hand on the dog's head. Survival, he was learning, was not a single heroic act. It was maintenance, like checking air pressure, like cleaning salt from metal, like waking from the same nightmare and letting a living creature remind the body that the war was not happening now. 2 weeks later, Truett and Mara returned to the bellwether for an approved reef survey. No emergency, no Hollis, no cameras waiting for a miracle, just work. The morning was clear, gentler than the day of the confrontation. Sunlight spread across the water in wide silver paths. The patrol boat rocked softly over the site while Nell monitored from shore and Blythe handled the permit log with almost ceremonial boredom. Vesper lay in the sun near the bow, eyes half closed, ears flicking whenever Truett moved. Truett entered the water without drama. That too was a miracle. Below, the bellwether appeared slowly through blue light. Its rusted frame was still broken, still scarred, still holding more history than any town could comfortably carry. But small fish moved through its ribs. Coral polyps opened in patient clusters. Life, stubborn and miniature, continued its ancient argument against ruin. Mara pointed toward a tagged section of reef. New growth. Not much. Enough. Truett hovered beside her, breathing evenly through the regulator. He looked up through the clear water. The surface shimmered above him. No longer only an escape route from a failed mission. No longer only the ceiling of an old grief. It was a way back. When he surfaced, Vesper was waiting. The German shepherd sprang up before anyone called him, tail cutting the air, paws skidding slightly on the wet deck. The majestic local hero nearly collided with a bucket, recovered with great dignity, and then shoved his wet nose directly into Truett's face. Mara laughed. Not almost laughed, laughed. Truett held the ladder with one hand, and Vesper's collar with the other. Water streamed from his sleeves. The sun caught in the dog's yellow-black fur until he seemed for one absurd and holy second like a piece of daylight that had learned to bark. On shore, Port Liora went on living. Not perfect, not saved once and for all, but awake. The bellwether remained below, not as a grave, not as a prize, but as a witness. Dorian would face court, Hollis would fight through lawyers, Mara would rebuild what she could, Blythe would write rules no tourist would ever read and every honest captain would depend on. Nell would continue denying she was beloved, June would keep accusing Vesper of attempted pastry theft, and Truett Kane would wake some nights with the sea still inside him. But now, when he woke, he would not wake alone. Vesper did not understand permits, evidence, shame, development deals, or the fragile politics of forgiveness. He did not understand why humans dressed greed in linen jackets or hung honor in glass cases. He understood older laws. Stay, listen, return. And sometimes, when a man had sunk too deep for words to reach him, loyalty could become the rope, not the kind tied around the chest for show, the kind that held. Sometimes the greatest courage is not in being honored, but in staying faithful when no one understands your warning. Vesper did not need a medal to prove his worth. He only needed someone to trust what he had been trying to say. And maybe that is one of the quiet graces God gives us in this life. A loyal heart, a small sign, a steady presence that pulls us back when we are sinking inside. In our own lives, may we learn to pay attention to what is true even when the crowd is clapping for something else. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of courage, healing, and loyal companions, please subscribe to the channel. May peace find you where you are, and may hope always know the way back to your door.